Hello and welcome to J&B Talk F1. I'm Jawad here and I'm joined by Bayden as always, and tonight we're going to talk about the Austrian Grand Prix. Good to have you with us, Bayden.
Very glad to be here. How are you, Jawad?
Very well, thank you. And interesting qualifying session yesterday for the Austrian Grand Prix tonight. Lewis Hamilton taking pole position in what was pretty much an anticlimactic session, considering Nico Rosberg, his teammate, who was on a final flying lap before he locked up going into turn 8 and effectively costing him pole position. But Lewis Hamilton had a spin of his own going into turn 1, much like he did last year at this circuit, but he already had the provisional pole, and very interesting considering the practice results, how Lewis Hamilton came and claimed pole by 2/10 over Rosberg in the end, isn't it?
Well, absolutely. I've got to admit that I was not able to take in the actual qualifying itself, but from what I've heard, it was a bit of a letdown in the sense that on Friday we had the Ferraris really threatening in third practice, and on the second practice we had Vettel topping the timesheets, but none of this came to fruition, and Mercedes at the end of the day were the ones fighting it out. So this notion that both cars at the final lap both ran wide adds to the intrigue. They were both clearly on the edge, but irrespective of that, they're both the ones starting on the front row and look like they're the ones who are going to be fighting out for the victory today.
Yes, and of course that was Hamilton's 45th career pole as well, which equals him with the man who's starting from third place today, Sebastian Vettel. Vettel and Hamilton have a joint record at the moment for third in the all-time pole positions list, behind Ayrton Senna, of course, who has 65 poles to his name, and Michael Schumacher with 68. But regardless of that, some other highlights from qualifying. Nico Hülkenberg, after his romp at Le Mans last week, he put in a season best qualifying for Force India, putting his car on 5th, just behind Felipe Massa in the Williams. Valtteri Bottas felt a little let down after only being able to salvage 6th. Max Verstappen, the shining light for the Red Bull camp, for the Red Bull family this weekend, with 7th on the grid. Daniel Kvyat qualified 8th, but because of his penalty due to the change power unit element, he'll be starting 10 places down and will be in 18th. Felipe Nasr, 9th for Sauber, so Sauber finally in the top 10 after a while, and because of Kvyat's penalty, Grosjean and Maldonado in the two Lotus cars will start inside the top 10. Obviously the penalties are something we're going to address very soon. A lot of people finding it very complicated and confusing how the penalties work regarding the changing of power unit elements, but we'll be sure to explain that for you. Ericsson, 12th, qualified 12th. Sainz disappointed down in 13th for Toro Rosso. Then we had Ricciardo in the second Red Bull, qualified 14th, but obviously he'll take a 10-place penalty as well. And obviously disappointed to be out-qualified by his junior teammate. Alonso, the first of the McLarens, qualified 15th, made it out of Q1 just barely, but he will take a penalty also. Sergio Perez in the Force India, unlucky to be knocked out in Q1. Jenson Button knocked out in Q1, but will take a penalty. Kimi Räikkönen, though, he was the big scalp to fall out in Q1. Now the Finn...
Yes, he disappoints on Saturday once again.
And this is interesting because you, Bayden, wrote an article regarding Kimi's Saturday form a few weeks ago, and we'll have the link for that for you to read in the description. But yes, Kimi Räikkönen qualified 18th, but he'll move up to 14th as a result of these penalties, but nevertheless still a fairly disastrous outing for the Finn on Saturday.
Well, basically going back a couple of weeks prior to the Canadian Grand Prix, ran a bit of an analysis regarding Kimi Räikkönen's Saturday form, which has been rather wanting throughout this season. Certainly an improvement on Sundays where he was at in 2014, yet the fact remains that on Saturdays he's leaving himself far too much to achieve, and he's often fighting for 4th or 5th place at an optimum. So he came to this weekend looking quite sharp during the practice sessions, and he's ultimately made a blunder with the strategy on his final runs. Apparently he had an extra lap available there, and he wasn't aware of this, and as a result, he was eliminated in the first round of qualifying. And again, he's compromised for Sunday. You do have to wonder at this point, though, how much of it's down to the team and how much is down to the driver himself, because it's now round 8 and it's becoming close to crunch time as far as deciding whether he'll be renewed or moved on for next season.
And it remains to be seen or not whether Räikkönen can emulate his teammates' efforts at the previous race in Canada, where Vettel, not of his own volition entirely, started from 18th on the grid and was able to salvage 5th place. So Räikkönen, he'll be starting a bit further up, as I said, in 14th, and we'll see if he can break through into the points and even try and get that top 5 position if possible. But rounding up the qualifying results, Roberto Merri in the Mana Marussia out-qualified his teammate once again, Will Stevens, but again, because of those penalties, they will have their positions elevated. Now, to tackle the issue of the penalties. So, 4 drivers.
Yes, I was going to say, even I'm quite confused myself, so this will be quite a learning experience for me personally. So if you care to enlighten myself and the audience, that would be much appreciated.
Well, it did take me a while to get my head around it, but nevertheless, here we go. So there's going to be 4 drivers for this race will be taking penalties. Danny Kvyat, Daniel Ricciardo in the two Red Bull cars, and then of course the 2 McLaren Hondas of Fernando Alonso and Jenson Button. Now Danny Kvyat has the easiest of them all. He qualified 8th. He'll be taking a 10-place penalty, so that'll mean he just drops down to 18th, automatic. He doesn't have to take any other penalty. But from Ricciardo onwards is where it gets a bit complicated. Now Ricciardo, he qualified 14th, but because of the 10-place penalty he's incurred, he will have to drop to the back of the grid, but also get a 5-second time penalty, which will be served during a pit stop or at the end of the race. So Ricciardo gets that. Alonso and Button, meanwhile, they have 25-place grid penalties. Now, 25-place grid penalties on a 20-place grid, where's the logic? But nevertheless, the way that the penalties will be served is Alonso will take a drive-through penalty, which he must serve within the first 3 laps of the race. Meanwhile,
just to confuse things a bit more.
Yes. Meanwhile, Jenson Button will take a 10-second stop-go penalty when he starts the race. So he'll come into the pits, he'll stop for 10 seconds, and then he'll be on his way. And yeah, that's because on Jenson Button's McLaren, the team completely changed the power unit, using up the 5th elements on all the parts that are available, which incurs then, of course, 25 places. Alonso originally was supposed to take a 20-place penalty for changing his turbocharger and MGU-H component, taking a 5th element of that, but also after free practice 3, the team had to change a gearbox as well, so an extra 5 places added onto that. So that means the way the grid is going to look with these penalties is that Kvyat will start down in 15th, Merri and Stevens will be elevated to 16th and 17th. Ricciardo will be 18th, Alonso 19th, and Button 20th on the grid. So that's the way that the penalties work. I hope we've shed some light on you there. How about you, Bayden? Do you feel that I've shed some light on the penalties?
Valuable lesson indeed, Jawad. Based on what you've just enlightened us on, the takeaway is Formula One is an extremely confusing business. How they've come to this rationale to figure out the unique sanctions for each driver, whether it's a time penalty, a drive-through, whatever it is, grid drop, amongst these supernatural 25 position drops, which can't even be enforced amongst a 20 grid field. That really is credit to the lawmakers, essentially, of this sport. They've sat down over whatever it might have been, whichever beverage on Saturday afternoon, and come up with this algorithm to figure out the ultimate grid. So yes, I'm quite happy though that analysis will at least enable the viewers to have some idea about how it will all play out.
Nevertheless, it's going to be a difficult afternoon for those guys anyway. Red Bull obviously in front of their home crowd, this being the Red Bull Ring, and the co-owner of Red Bull, Dietrich Mateschitz, will also be present, and he's made his views on Red Bull's current position with Renault quite vocal during the week. But they might as well be starting in at the Nürburgring or something. Then
that far away.
25 places back on the grid. But we'll look ahead to the race now, and there could be some rain on the horizon.
Yes, well, we haven't really seen. Austria's obviously only been back on the calendar since last season, but the last time we did really see wet at Austria was in 1998 for qualifying, and that wreaked havoc. But going beyond that, this season we haven't exactly seen a wet race during the season. So this could be the first opportunity for some really unpredictable results. Who knows who this is going to affect, but maybe it's a chance for these lesser lights, the Red Bulls and co, to maybe make something of their weekend when they would have thought it's a write-off, especially in front of their home crowd. But whether it comes to fruition is another thing. We do often see the case of the forecast rain from the day leading up to the race, and it never eventuates. So really
or
just
it
going to
eventuates after the race.
Yeah, that's probably what will happen. The moment the winner crosses the line, there'll be a deluge.
Indeed, and otherwise, if there is no rain, indeed, the race 71 lap race should perhaps see its processional event. It is expected.
Yeah, it goes without saying, if there's no rain, you'd expect Mercedes, the way things are going, given where they were on Friday, people were thinking Ferrari's on it, but if Mercedes continue from qualifying, they're going to be the ones setting the pace, and it's going to be whoever can come third.
But still, I wouldn't rule out Ferrari just yet. Sebastian Vettel, obviously, you mentioned the being good on Friday. He's still pretty positive with a long run. So, I was going to mention that it's likely it's going to be a one-stop affair. Start on the super soft tyres and then switch to the softs around lap 25, around that mark, and run to the end. So if Vettel gets a good start from third, perhaps even splits the Mercedes, we could see him potentially challenge. And but the thing about Mercedes, as you said, is they don't show their hand immediately on Friday, but then perhaps they'll have this unnatural race pace that we see today. But I'm sure they have admitted that it's been a bit of a difficult weekend for them. We saw their drivers pushing very hard, Hamilton and Rosberg yesterday, and they made mistakes. So this could be potentially, Ferrari's weekend. Williams also lie as a dark horse with Felipe Massa. So remains to be seen.
I think generally you've seen the Mercedes here are in quite a strong position in the top six positions. They've got obviously the silver arrows at the front, Massa in the Williams in fourth, Hülkenberg fifth. So whether they'll assert their advantage into the race, or whether we can see the Ferraris really mix it up at the start, that will be crucial. We have seen earlier at Spain, obviously Vettel got the jump on Hamilton at the start, yet the Briton was able to reassume that second position following his final stop. So really the proof's going to be in the opening stint, whether Ferrari has the outright pace to get into outright position and make a bit of headway.
Indeed, and just before we conclude this edition, who will be your prediction then to take out the race?
Well, I said on Wednesday, I believed it would be a Mercedes clean sweep with, I'd mentioned Vettel or Valtteri Bottas for the final podium slot. I'm not going to deviate from that thinking this evening. I would go so far as to say that Nico Rosberg, I think, has got a very strong chance, though, of being the one who comes home first. He's been showing the way, really, until Saturday. He looked like he was the more comfortable of the drivers, so he might be able to pull something off today.
Yeah, but that's an interesting point, and it is a must-deliver weekend for Rosberg, considering his teammate has won 4 races so far this season to his only to 1, which Rosberg has. So I would say Hamilton to win, just based off the form he's shown in the past few races. But anything could happen really if we do get rain. So
Yeah, I concur. Really, the real variable is the rain there, but other than that, it's going to be hard to see the status quo being affected too greatly.
well, we better get cracking on our rain dances then. But
Well,
other than that,
maybe a
thank
quick
you.
mention before we go, maybe about the V8 supercars this weekend. We had a very important moment with a certain Craig Lowndes, a huge milestone there.
Yes, a very big shout out to Craig Lowndes, obviously in the V8 Supercars, notching up 100 career wins, which is a first for that category. And yeah, for a guy who's been around the sport since 1996, it is a very monumental achievement for Australian motorsport fans and, of course, people who follow V8 Supercars across the world. So good on him.
And do you care to explain the little quirk which you took note of when he achieved this victory? There was a particular number which was quite fitting, I think.
Yes, well, obviously for those who follow V8 Supercars, they know that Craig Lowndes races under the number 888, and this also happened. That also happened to be his 888th race start as well. So quite fitting to achieve 100 wins on your 888th race start. A number that he has used for quite so many years, being under the 888 race engineering operation.
Well, clearly it was meant to be in that case. It took a while for him to get there from his 99th victory at, I believe it was Simmons Plains at the end of March, so it's 2.5 months, but he's finally got there, and obviously Wing Cup's on 91, so he might eclipse him soon enough, but whilst he's at it, you've got to take your hat off to Lowndes. He is one of the living legends.
Yeah, of course. Lowndes has given so much to the sport. He really is the people's champion in that regard. So I think he'll go down as a legend. Regardless.
Absolutely. I hope he's around for a couple of years to come, and hopefully another title maybe at some point, because it has been also, in this respect, quite a while between drinks.
Indeed it has, and we look forward to bringing you some more V8 Supercar news in future podcasts. But for this evening, from myself, Jawad and Bayden, I wish you good night and hope you enjoy the race. Thank you very much for joining us.
Bye. Bye.